It is young people and unfortunately children. I mean, we're finding an enormous number of kids under 18 finding their way to be able to bet online and to bet big. And it's really reshaping a whole generation.
One for mum, one for dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer knows.
I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains politics, policy, and economics in plain English. I'm your host, Ebony Bennett. This week, one of Australia's biggest events on the Australian sporting calendar gets underway. Sydney will host Game 1 of Rugby League's State of Origin series, or Football Christmas, as our producer Angus likes to call it. New South Wales goes in as the favourites against rival Queensland, and we know that because the odds are displayed on the NRL app. Thanks to a bombardment of ads on TV and online, most viewers will be well aware of the myriad ways they can put money on the game, often on their phone without having to leave their couch. Australians broadly hate it. A huge majority support a ban on gambling ads, and the government promised to take gambling reform seriously.
The evidence was clear. If the status quo on online gambling regulation, including but certainly not limited to advertising, was to continue, Australians will continue to lose more. More money, more relationships, more love of sport for the game rather than for the odds.
But more than 1,000 days after the late Labor MP Peter Murphy handed down a parliamentary report into online gambling harms, the government finally released its response.
We are getting the balance right, letting adults have a punt if they want to, but making sure that our children don't see betting ads everywhere they look.
History shows us that partial bans don't work.
It's predatory. The only way you stop it is by having a complete ban on online ads.
Social media, kids are still going to be seeing gambling ads, and that's what Murphy said to stop.
And not only does the response fall well short of the Murphy Review recommendations, the government tabled it while journalists and politicians were locked away for the federal budget. Joining me today to discuss gambling in Australia and the government's response to the Murphy Review is the CEO of the Alliance for Gambling Reform, Martin Thomas. G'day, Martin.
Hi, Ebony.
And Australia Institute Research Manager, Morgan Harrington. G'day, Morgan.
Hi, Ebony.
Martin, I want to start with you. Can you tell us, just give us a picture to begin with, how much do Australians gamble? Are we big gamblers?
We are the biggest losers in the world per capita when it comes to gambling, unfortunately. It's a title no one really wants. We lose $32 billion to gambling every year. And it's not because we, as a culture, are more likely to gamble than other cultures. You hear Australians say we love a punt, but you go to other countries, Ireland, China, they say similar things. It's really the lack of a regulatory regime here that actually protects us. And as you mentioned, the proliferation of gambling ads here. We have 1 million ads on our screens every year. We are completely bombarded, and advertising works, and that's leading to more and more people losing money.
So, as you said, the online gambling ads are absolutely rampant. I find them insanely annoying and infuriating, and you just can't seem to escape them. And it really paints a picture that gambling has become deeply intertwined with Australian sports, essentially. What impact has this had on our gambling habits?
Well, it has changed them dramatically. I mean, when you look at losses, traditionally, Australians used to lose a lot more from poker machines, and poker machines are still the largest areas of losses, but they're growing in those losses at about 4 or 5% a year. What is growing at a staggering rate, about 40% a year, almost doubling every year, is sports betting on the phone. And it's a whole new generation that it's doing it. It's no longer, say, the old person in the smoky corner of a pub playing a poker machine and everyone kind of shakes their head as they walk past saying it's their own silly fault. It is young people, and unfortunately, children. I mean, we're finding an enormous number of kids under 18 finding their way to be able to bet online and to bet big. And it's really reshaping a whole generation.
Yeah, Morgan, the Australia Institute has done some research into that. What does it show about the impact this is having on young Australians?
Yeah, so look, it's hard to know what's happening with people who are below the age of 18 because technically they're doing something illegal. But from the best available data, what we found is that over 600,000 Australians aged between the ages of 12 and 17 are gambling each year. So that's 600,000 young Australians who are more likely to be gambling than they are to be playing any of the most popular sports in Australia, so rugby or AFL or tennis or cricket. Teenagers in Australia are more likely to be having a punt. And we found that the rate increases to just below half of 18 and 19-year-old Australians. And we know that those figures persist into people's 20s. So these relationships with gambling that are formed when Australians are children persist into adulthood, and they can develop really harmful habits that could last a lifetime.
So younger people are more likely to be gambling on sports than playing sports, essentially.
Yeah, that's it. The 600,000 12 to 17-year-olds is enough to fill the MCG 6 times over. And it means that if you're a 12 to 17-year-old Australian, if you're an Australian teenager, you're more likely to have gambled in the past year than you are to have played any of the most popular team sports.
I mean, that is just extraordinary.
Over the last 6 months, a year, I've been at a number of social events, weddings, birthdays, where young men have asked if they could have a quick chat to me in private. And they've opened up about their struggle with gambling, their losses, the shame that they have felt with an addiction that they don't feel like they can talk about publicly, what that's doing to them, and then how damn hard it is to actually deal with it when you're getting bombarded with ads. Bombarded with ads.
Martin, while gambling is a casual activity for many people, it's obviously can become a very serious issue for a number of people. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the impact of the kind of saturation of gambling ads and the impact that's having on people's lives?
Yeah, we know it has an enormous impact. We know there's obviously incredible financial hardship that happens. That leads to greater mental health issues and general health issues because people are worrying about how to pay back this debt. We know it leads to marriage breakup, divorce, bankruptcies. At the more disturbing end, research shows that if a person in a relationship has a gambling problem, there's 3 times more likely to have partner violence in that relationship. We, on the eve of state of origin, as you mentioned, research has been done to show that during the nights that these games are played, there's a spike, largely due to betting and alcohol, in the number of calls made to those hotlines for domestic violence to report domestic violence. The government's own task force, or the Prime Minister's own task force into domestic violence, one of the key recommendations was to ban gambling ads. So there's a clear correlation on those things. Perhaps most disturbingly of all is some research that was done in Victoria looking at coronial deaths, which found that we don't really collect the data we need. So it's really something that we're only starting, I think, to recognize as a society just how damaging this is.
Yeah, I think you've just outlined there. A lot of people would assume it's just about the lost money, but that's deaths. It's violence. It's all kinds of different impacts that this has on people's lives. So the parliamentary inquiry into gambling harms led by the late Peter Murphy, it got huge coverage at the time, and the Prime Minister said the government would take decisive action and get the balance right in its response. Has it?
Well, it's fascinating language when they talk about the balance right, because it's really setting up a straw man. The government says we're the balance between people to protecting our kids from gambling ads and harm and those that love a punt. Now, no one, and the Alliance certainly doesn't, is looking to ban gambling. No one is trying to stop anyone from having a punt. We are really looking at trying to reduce the harm that gambling causes, and we believe advertising is a key one. Now, the government, after more than 1,000 days of silence, any response was great, we have to say, to start with. And there were some good things in what the government outlined, particularly what they said their goals were. They said they wanted to protect children from gambling advertising. They said they wanted to stop the saturation of gambling ads, and they wanted to break the nexus between sport and gambling.
Is that what it's achieved?
Look, it hasn't. The reforms they're suggesting are far too timid. There are some positives. They are looking to ban advertising in sports stadiums and advertising on players' jerseys. But at the end of the day, they have only restricted slightly the number of gambling ads we're going to see. So currently, there isn't a cap on gambling ads, but we're getting about 8 ads an hour. This new legislation will say between 6 and 8:30 p.m. There'll be a cap of 3 gambling ads, but then after that, it's a free-for-all. And in terms of live sport, it will be banned up until 8:30. There won't be any ads, but after 8:30, there will be no limit. So if you're watching a night game, pretty much after halftime, you'll be slammed with ads. And really, if we think of the ban that was on tobacco, no one thought 3 tobacco ads an hour was a good outcome. This is essentially what we're going to get, and a lot more post 8:30.
And if I could just jump in there was a partial ban on forms of gambling advertising introduced back in 2018. But when there was a government review done, what they found is that there was an increase in the number of gambling ads outside of the times that they were restricted. So what will probably happen is that we'll just have more ads, but at different times of day.
So, Morgan, a ban on online advertising was really a key recommendation of the Murphy report. And our polling tells us that those kinds of bans are extremely popular with Australians. That's not what the government has announced, but what does our polling tell us about what the public wants?
Well, what our polling shows is that consistently 3 in 4 Australians want a ban on gambling advertising. And that's a ban, not a restriction. So we ran a poll in March last year, and 76% of Australians said they would support a full ban on online gambling advertising, which is exactly what the Murphy Review called for. We did a very similar poll just before the government's response to the review was announced, and we found that 77% of Australians support a total ban on gambling advertising. Now, what's really interesting about this is not only is support high and consistent, but it's true across voting intentions. So 66% of One Nation Party voters support a total ban. 81% of Labor voters support a total ban, and 88% of Greens voters support a total ban on gambling advertising. So this is clearly really popular public policy that Australians want to see implemented.
Yeah, across the political spectrum. So, Martin, can you give us a picture of how lucrative gambling is for the sports codes as opposed to the gambling industry?
Yeah, look, our football codes have gone all in on gambling. The AFL and the NRL reap an enormous amount of money, up to $50 million, although they don't disclose much, so it's quite opaque. But what we do know is they get 3 bites of the cherry. Essentially, they have gambling partners themselves that they generate income from. They can sell the broadcast rights for inflated amounts because they know those broadcasters can then flog endless gambling ads. And finally, and most troubling, the sports get a take of every losing bet. So up to we understand that we understand that for every $1, the AFL and the NRL would reap about 10 cents of every $1 lost. So they're ripping off their own supporters.
That is outrageous. I didn't know. How do you get that kind of a deal? Far out.
And that's why, we think of the government, we think, why on earth any other issue where 76%, even more of the population want action, why aren't they taking action? And the AFL, the NRL, free-to-air networks have all been lobbying furiously against this because, this happened, the same thing happened around tobacco advertising. We banned that from sport and they survived. They argue feverishly that they won't survive without this, and yet they managed to reap enormous profits.
Because everyone's on the gravy train.
Yeah, and just on the networks there, I mean, at Senate estimates hearing back in February, ACMA was asked, and apparently they have modelled just how much a full gambling ad ban would cost the broadcast networks, but they wouldn't release it, citing commercial in confidence deals. But we know that they've modelled just how much the networks would lose if a full ban was implemented. But, the Australian Institute's done research showing that a small levy of 2% on the gambling industry would more than offset whatever the networks might lose from lost advertising revenue. And that very
2%.
Yeah.
That's nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it very much echoes what the Murphy Review was suggesting to make the gambling companies pay for the reforms.
And look, there is no doubt that football codes, particularly, less so with cricket, have been one of three ways that the gambling industry has looked to groom young people. So obviously the odds, we get so many parents say their kids ask them what a multi is when they're watching the football. So certainly football has, certainly advertising has, and in fact, some research shows that kids as young as 8 and 10 can tell you the colours of each bookmaker and can even develop brand loyalty, that when they grow up, they'll gamble with whatever firm. So it's quite horrifying. And then there's also evidence that the gambling companies are targeting young people as young as 14 through social media to download gambling apps. So they're coming at them at three ways, but they are certainly looking to groom young people to gamble. And unfortunately, it's working.
So, Martin, the Murphy report recommended that the government establish, amongst other things, a national regulator for online gambling. Why was that such an important recommendation? Who currently regulates online gambling?
Yeah, no, it was a really important recommendation, and it's really largely because there's such a breakdown of different regulatory regimes at state and territory level. So a lot of the foreign-owned sports betting agencies that we see the ads from are all registered through the Northern Territory. They have a low tax regime, they pay very little tax, but it's their foothold into Australia, and that's why we see so many gambling ads on our screen. The Northern Territory for online bookmakers have effectively become a de facto national regulator, and yet it's a board, part-time board without any staff whatsoever. Certainly not fit for purpose. And then at the same time, when we think of other forms of gambling like poker machines, like casinos, the states and territories have consistently failed to regulate them properly. Money laundering, fraud, organised crime, all of these things have been exposed in a number of royal commissions. A national gambling regulator with teeth would tackle that.
And Martin, is there anything else that you think was missing from the government's response compared to what was recommended in the Murphy Review?
Yeah, look, one of the major failings of the government's response is not to impose a ban on inducements. So inducements are when you may stop gambling and you're wanting to stay away from gambling. The betting agencies spend a huge amount of dollars employing VIP managers who will reach out to you and say, hey, Martin, we miss you. Here's $500 we're going to put in your account of free bets, or here's some tickets to the football. And we know that it becomes a draw back into gambling. I personally have read the suicide note of one young man who talked about the fact that with inducements, he felt that he would never be able to give up gambling, and he felt terrible about how he treated his family and what kind of person he was when he gambled, and he saw no hope whatsoever. It's just such a tragic situation that young people are taking their lives literally because of this, and inducements are one of those key things that we really need to crack down on.
People really wanted that saturation and targeting of gambling advertising reduced, and they wanted the exposure of children to gambling advertising reduced.
The Prime Minister's talking about balance, but this should be less about compromise and more about commitment.
Vast majority of Australians saying, hey, we can see that banning all gambling ads and just getting on with it, protecting our kids, is in the best interest of us. It's something we want you to do. We've got a Prime Minister who bows to vested interests.
We're sick of gambling ads and we're sick of the effect that they're having on our society.
So, Martin, what are the next steps for the government's reforms here? Is it likely that they will continue, or are they just considering this job done effectively?
Yeah, well, there's two next steps. One is they have to get it through the Parliament, and obviously they have the numbers in the lower house, but when it comes to the Senate, they need either the support of the coalition or minor parties and independents. And that will be critical. They're looking at putting the legislation to the Parliament in about August, and then the horse trading will start. Our big hope is that the coalition won't just wave it through. Even under Peter Dutton, in one of his budget reply speeches, he suggested at least an hour ban on gambling advertising around live sport, which at the time was pretty weak, but it's still better than what the government is proposing from a broadcast point of view. So, look, we would hope to strengthen this legislation, and then after it goes through, there still is a lot of pressure that we want to maintain on the Labor Party. A lot of people in caucus are really unsatisfied with the extent of these reforms, and we need to get the government to clearly understand that this is not one and done, but the start of a process.
Morgan, is there any reason why the government couldn't go further with these reforms? I mean, there's no public benefit to any of this. In fact, Martin and you have both talked about kind of the very obvious harms here. I mean, where does the government go from here, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's worth noting that through the inquiry, Murphy achieved a rare consensus in Australian politics. They made recommendations for ambitious reforms that take on vested interests and that were backed by every parliamentarian on the committee. So that's Labor, Liberal and Independent. So there's cross-party support for a total ban on gambling advertising and regulating gambling at a national level. And the idea was that these reforms would be funded through a levy imposed on the gambling industry. And the response that the government's recently announced doesn't say anything about that at all. Now, on top of that, we know through our polling that this would be really popular public policy. So really the only thing holding the government back from this kind of reform is their own ambition. This would be really popular and benefit a tremendous amount of Australians who are vulnerable to the harms that gambling can cause.
Well, thank you very much for joining us this week, Martin and Morgan.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ebony.
If this episode has raised issues for you, you can call the National Gambling Helpline on 1800 858 858 for free, professional and confidential support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or visit Gambling Help Online at gamblinghelponline.org.au. If you or anyone you know needs help, you can contact Lifeline on 131114 or online at lifeline.org.au. This episode was recorded on Tuesday, the 26th of May, and some things may have changed since recording. If you want to read more from our research about gambling in Australia and much more, check out thepoint.com.au, and our theme music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm your host, Ebony Bennett. Thanks for listening.